Today, the BFA project finally continues. The most important question in such a project is, of course, in which scooter such an engine can be accommodated in style. And in my case, there was only one choice. This scooter right here. This is a custom scooter from the 1980s. The paint job comes from a Yamaha Genesis and was done in 1988. And as you can see, I'm way too young to have done it myself. Christian from Lübeck deserves the honor for this. Greetings again at this point. I think the scooter is already being rebuilt for the third time since I owned it. Only a few parts are repainted, like the handlebar head and the glove box. Everything else remains original and continues to tell many stories from the past 30 years. As you can see, a lot has already been prepared. I used the SiP performance cables here, and I think that's a very good tip, even if it's just a small part. But the SiP performance wire rope hoists are very stiff, and they transmit the force very well, so the gears, clutch and brakes will all be a little more direct and easier to use. This has a very positive effect. If you have a scooter or a chassis completely naked in front of you, then it makes sense to start thinking about which cables you have to pull through the frame, because in that situation it's the easiest. In my case, I have the frame prepared for the SiP digital speedometer with tachometer, and I have laid 3 additional cable branches through the frame. First, for the black box. You could also leave that in the steering head, but you have a little more space if you take this extension and put the black box down here. The second cable is for the temperature sensor from the exhaust temperature. And the third cable branch is for the fuel level indicator. I've put all 3 cables right through the frame. That means I can connect them as I want without having to disassemble everything later on to pull any cables through. The most important thing in such a project, which is set out to be very powerful, is of course the chassis and the brake, so that the good piece always remains on the street and comes to a standstill again. And what I came up with or plan to build, that I'll show you over there. Let's start with the steering fork. I installed a little something here that I had still from my racing scooters. Here's a Molossi brake disc, a Molossi shock absorber, and very important, I used a Lusso steering fork as the base, which is a bit thicker from the standpipe than the old fork. It is then cut another 2 centimeters. The strut that is built in is actually meant to fit into a Vespa PK. It is 5 centimeters shorter. This results in a somewhat flatter swing angle, which is quite good for driving stability. What else do I have installed? First, our brake drum, which has the original look but can accommodate a disc brake. It is an original Grimeca part. Grimeca also makes the original components for the PX98, for example. And of course our SiP 2.0 tubeless rim with TÜV approval. Generally, a little hint on the subject. It is always best if you intend to build a scooter like this to discuss everything with your TÜV or test engineer beforehand. That's how I did it. I went there beforehand and told him what I plan to do, what I want to build in the scooter, and he told me what he thinks of it and also what he doesn't like so much. So let's start and install the steering fork and add some little things until it gets really exciting and I put the engine in the frame. First, I'll knock out the old steering head bearings and then I install new ones and install the fork. This is a special tool from SiP. It works very well. Just hit it softly so that it doesn't fly that far. There's the second. First thing, I'll fit the bearing shells that are in the frame. The top one is very easy. You just have to see that you attach it straight and then carefully knock on the edge. If it changes the tone, then it sits on. Just make sure it's clean below. Then there are different methods to pull it in. There are also very nice pull-in tools, but I still prefer to do it with a hammer and a punch. Just knock the very edge of the bearing with the punch and don't hit it on the tread. This is very important. Now you can hear that the sound is changing. There as well. There as well. You can also feel that the distances are even and the sound is much brighter now. Then it sits in the end stop and sits also very nice and straight. I always go around the outside to make sure that it really fits. I've cleaned the fork already. The dust protection ring is always the first to install. There are models with rubber lips available today, like this, but I still prefer the old ones. Now, the lower bearing shell. And to get it right, there is a special tool. It's just a long pipe that I can hit up here. And with that, I can start pretty straightforward and then use a hammer to mount the bearing. In fact, there are much more modern concepts today. Actually, modern motorcycles usually have tapered roller bearings, which are now also available for old scooters. I wanted to build that in here, but the problem is, those who have been there on the market are a little higher. So they're higher than the original steering head bearings, and if I install this here, then the scooter comes up a little and the front gap gets bigger here. And I want to avoid that at all costs. With steering head bearings, the manufacturers change occasionally, and it is always a bit of a question what quality you get. You should always pay close attention to this and look for really good quality, because the steering head bearing is very important for driving behavior. The ones from Piaggio are currently quite good. This is a FAG bearing at the top, and the one at the bottom also runs quite nicely. The important thing is that there must always be enough fat in here. The nice thing about tapered roller bearings and why I mention them, they are a whole more stable than ball bearings, more durable, and the bike is actually a bit more stable with them. Robert, could you lower the hoist for me? Until I say stop. This is a special tool by SIP to tighten the steering head bearing. Of course, we're too easy in the back now. Alright, that's good.